March 25 to 2026. We are in the 5th year, day 27 since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Welcome. I greet you to the situation report. In today's report, we will look at mutual major attacks. We will see how the Russians are trying to advance further, especially in the area around Liman, because an extremely large attack was reported there, which once again gives us a very interesting insight into the new, or actually very outdated way of attacking. We will also take a look at 2 very interesting reports about drones from both sides. Also, a very interesting, I'll just call it a communication problem on the Russian side, as well as much more. In current footage that we can see right now, a Swedish Saab 340 airborne early warning and sea aircraft is very likely visible over Ukraine. The silhouette and the characteristic radar system on the fuselage clearly indicate this airborne early warning and control aircraft, which we already looked at a year ago. We looked at it a little over a year ago when the Swedes announced they would deliver it to Ukraine. The possible deployment of this system is of significant importance for Ukraine because the aircraft is primarily used for airspace surveillance and battle management. It can detect targets at great distances and simultaneously create a comprehensive situational picture, which is then passed on to its own air and ground forces. This means, above all, that Russian aircraft can be detected very early. Especially in the current conflict, where the airspace is highly contested, such a system could enable Ukraine to detect Russian air movements early, coordinate threats more effectively, and use its own air defense more efficiently. In addition, it also improves the coordination of fighter jets, since targets can be assigned more precisely and missions can be better coordinated. If the permanent deployment is confirmed, this would be another step towards a clear, networked, and modern air warfare capability on the Ukrainian side, where sensors, air defense, and air forces are closely integrated. According to Airbus Ukraine, Ukrainian forces have shot down a new, so far rarely used Russian drone of the Klin type. The system apparently is a compact attack or kamikaze drone with a range of approximately 120 kilometers and a warhead of around 5 kilograms. According to expert assessments, the technology used behind it is particularly striking. The drone is said to have a modern battery solution that gives it a comparatively high range despite its very small and compact size. In addition, there is another potentially relevant capability. The expert flash assumes that the Klin is capable of independently detecting and targeting objectives, meaning it can operate at least partially autonomously. If this is confirmed, it would make defense more difficult, since such systems are less dependent on continuous radio communication or external control. So the shootdown not only provides a, tactical success, but also the opportunity to examine a new Russian drone. This is also another research war, a war of technologies, a war in which everyone tries to constantly bring a new solution or a new type of drone to the table that can replace the old one or eliminate certain weaknesses. The other side is doing the same thing. And especially for the lesser-known platforms on the Russian side, this has been particularly valuable for Ukraine in order to adapt countermeasures more quickly and to be able to better defend against future operations. But let's stay with drones for now. The Ukrainian loitering munition Bulava showed a significant increase in operational intensity in March and is increasingly delivering visible results, similar to what we saw back then with the FP2 drones. According to available data, usage has reached an all-time high, indicating that this system has now been firmly integrated into Ukrainian combat operations. Just the documented hits this month include a number of high-value Russian air defense targets. These include, among others, Buk M3 systems, as well as Buk M2 reloading vehicles, a Buk M1, Strela 10, a Tor M1, and additionally, a Zenitnaya Ustanovka 23 anti-aircraft vehicle. However, the actual number is likely somewhat higher, since not all operations are made public as a rule. It's also very noticeable that the Bulava is not used exclusively against air defense. Over the course of the month, it was also used against a variety of other targets, which suggests a broad tactical role, similar to the classic kamikaze drones at the front back then. And to be honest, that's not really surprising. Back then, if you take a look at the Bulava, You'll see for yourself it looks like a Russian reconnaissance drone. And as you know me, I often complain about Russian technology, but the reconnaissance drone, I haven't said a bad word about it yet because in my eyes, it's actually a very good drone, and it has proven itself time and again. The similarity is, of course, undeniable. The Ukrainians have copied one of the most effective systems from the Russian side, and not without reason. That's exactly why it is the way it is. But it's also logical that they would copy these drones and develop and use a comparable system, as you can see. And we see that it remains cost-effective, can be used flexibly, and is also precise enough to take out high-value targets, as well as air defense systems. The hits of the month speak for themselves. The 3rd Ukrainian Army Corps reports having repelled one of the largest Russian attacks of the ongoing earlier 2026 offensive on the Lyman-Burova axis on March 19th, so 3 days ago. But the report was only published now. According to Ukrainian sources, Russian forces attacked simultaneously in 7 different directions. More than 500 soldiers were deployed, along with about 28 armored vehicles and 100 motorcycles, ATVs, and buggies. This composition is no coincidence. It reflects current Russian attack doctrine, a combination of classic mechanized elements and highly mobile light infantry units designed to quickly cover ground. Despite this massive approach, according to Ukrainian sources, the attack was completely repelled. The Ukrainian positions held and Russian losses are said to be around 400 men. No information was provided about their own losses. Even though such numbers should naturally be viewed with caution, the scale mainly shows one thing. The attack failed and was extremely costly for the attacking side. This advance fits into the bigger picture of the current ongoing Russian offensive. Russia is currently trying to apply pressure along several sections of the front at the same time, especially in the Donbass area, in order to force operational breakthroughs. However, it is also noticeable that they are once again falling back into a familiar pattern. Broad, massive attacks that rely on breakthroughs, weight, and speed, which hardly work anymore in a drone war. And this exact pattern has already proven to be problematic in the earlier phases of the war. Such attacks are impressive in their scale, but they have a crucial disadvantage. They can be detected very early. Movements of large formations, especially with armored vehicles, create a high signature, both visually and in terms of reconnaissance policy. Russian attack doctrine shows that in recent months, the Russian attack doctrine has been more successful with other types of attacks than with small infiltration groups, for example. These often consist of only a few soldiers, move on foot or with light vehicles, and exploit gaps in the front, since the front line, due to its length and the personnel shortages on both sides, is not densely manned everywhere. If such groups can sometimes penetrate deep without being immediately detected, they secure valuable positions, infiltrate further and further into the hinterland, and can regroup there and occupy the area, making it difficult to get rid of them. But if you launch a large-scale attack as we see here, then we see the same result as we've seen in recent years. And this exact type of warfare has brought Russia small, local successes again and again. So, the one where they relied on very small infiltration groups and not on large attacks without being immediately detected. The attack now being observed in the region stands in clear contrast to that doctrine. Instead of relying on discrete, flexible movements, a large-scale offensive thrust was carried out here. The result shows the weakness of this approach in the current combat environment. Heavy losses, no breakthrough. This once again confirms a central pattern of the war. Large, visible attacks often fail against prepared defenses and modern reconnaissance, while small, hard-to-detect units can operate much more effectively. The Russian spring offensive is therefore facing a dilemma. On the one hand, it needs mass and pressure to achieve operational effects. On the other hand, it is precisely this mass that makes their movements visible and vulnerable. As long as this tension is not resolved, Russia will likely continue to have difficulty achieving decisive breakthroughs, even if pressure can be applied locally from time to time. Now comes a bit of self-promotion, because I have something very special with me exclusively for you. Our glass photos are entering the next round. After the Patriot system and the Leopard 2A6, we now also have something brand new, the Panzerhaubitze 2000 as a high-quality glass photo, a real highlight for everyone who has already celebrated these projects. Group orders are open now until the end of April. After that, the next chance will be at the end of the year. So make sure to check out this great piece. The link, as always, can be found in the video description at nerdbases.com. A bit further south, but only a few kilometers away, the situation around Hill 207, which we've looked at several times, has escalated further in recent days. Russian forces were able to advance along the eastern slope and began in early March to infiltrate the fortified forest complex on the ridge with small dismounted assault groups. Intense fighting for control of this key terrain is currently ongoing there. At the same time, the 88th Motorized Rifle Brigade is conducting supporting attacks on the southeastern edge of the ridge. In the process, Russian units managed to prevent advances up to the northeastern outskirts of the fortified forest. To advance and establish themselves there, all of this is marked on the situation map. Overall, this indicates that the offensive of the Russian Third, which has been ongoing since February, army in this sector is entering a decisive phase. Russian forces apparently are on the verge of forcing the Ukrainian units to retreat from the line they have held since December 2025, especially on Hill 207, which is extremely well defended. If they lose that, it would be a big problem in this area. Such a retreat would push the Ukrainian forces back to the first main defensive line east of Sloviansk, in the area around Bulava. This would put Sloviansk itself within range of Russian tube artillery, which would of course be an operationally significant step for the Russian side. What do we see here on the situation map? I'll zoom out a bit. We can see that Sloviansk isn't actually that far away anymore. If we take a closer look, I've brought up the measuring tools for this. The edge of the town and the front line are about 20 to 15 kilometers apart, depending on where you measure, which of course becomes a big problem for Ukraine. If they lose this hill and these positions here, they'll be pushed back and then they'll have to regroup somewhere further back along another line, which would also be the last line before Sloviansk. What's striking here is that the attacking Russian Third Army, despite its comparatively low combat effectiveness, since it's mostly made up of units from the former LNR, is still able to make progress. The decisive factor here seems to be less the strength of the attackers and more the personnel weakness of the Ukrainian defenders. The central units of the battle group, especially the 54th Mechanized Brigade and the 10th. According to reports, the Mountain Assault Brigade has about 30 to 40% of its full strength. That means they are not even at full manpower. Under normal circumstances, such units would have already been withdrawn from the front for replenishment. The personnel shortages are further highlighted by the fact that even units like the 718th Independent Driver Training Battalion have been moved to the combat area for reinforcement, a clear indication of the very strained personnel situation within the Solider battle group and the Ukrainian armed forces as a whole. Thus, an important point here is not the quality of the Russian offensive, but rather the exhaustion or understaffing of the Ukrainian defense, which could be decisive in determining whether this section of the front can be held or not. There are now further details about the downing of the Russian Ka-52 near Pokrovsk, which shed a different light on the incident. For those who missed it, the attack helicopter was shot down by a first-person view drone, an incident that at first seemed almost like a lucky hit. However, new information shows that this was preceded by a longer and targeted preparation. According to the commander of the Ukrainian Battalion Predator for Fights, the helicopter, or its flight routes, were observed and analyzed over about 1.5 months. During this time, there were numerous attempts to intercept the Ka-52, including a failure where the drone missed the target by only a few meters. They say it was about 2. It was only after the subsequent approach that the hit was finally achieved. Apparently a frontal and deliberate strike, not a coincidence as we initially thought. This highlights 2 important points. Such shootdowns may look really spectacular and spontaneous from the outside, but in reality they are the result of reconnaissance, pattern recognition, and repeated attempts, especially with hard-to-engage targets like helicopters, which move quickly and usually operate under protection. Such a success is practically impossible without systematic preparation, unless it's an absolute lucky shot. The use of a fiber optic controlled first-person view drone also plays a crucial role here, since it is less susceptible to electronic interference and can be used even in heavily contested environments. And the second thing is that if the Ukrainians have already tried it several times before and the Russians haven't done anything about it, then it also suggests that the previous attacks which were noticed simply weren't responded to. Overall, the incident clearly shows that the battlefield has changed significantly. Complex and expensive systems like a K-52 can now be taken out with relatively simple means, provided that planning, timing, and reconnaissance are right. And that sounds easier than it actually is, because with such a shoot-down, both skill and a bit of luck are required. Maybe they'll learn and change it, stop sending it so close to the front, or use it with a drone protection cage in the future. In St. Petersburg, mobile internet was apparently temporarily shut down. According to Russian sources, this measure is related to the threat of Ukrainian drone attacks. Such shutdowns can especially prevent drones from being controlled via mobile networks or transmitting target information. However, the impact on the civilian population is noticeable. In a video, a local resident complains that her smartphone has become practically unusable and asks how long such restrictions will last. Another point that stands out: services and social networks no longer work, but apparently one platform continues to function without any problems. And that is, who would have thought, the state-controlled messenger, Max. This leads to an interesting development. Measures that are obviously and officially intended to protect against drone attacks also have the effect of severely restricting the digital space, forcing users to increasingly switch to state-controlled communication channels. This once again shows how closely military necessity and information control are linked in this conflict. And with that, I would like to thank all subscribers, economic leaders, and the Algo crew. Special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Renicky, Selective Ferry, and Meyerhofer. Please subscribe, like, comment, and see you in the next report.